Hello! Welcome back to another episode of the Delicious Legacy podcast. My name is Thomas Dinas, and on each episode I'm going to take you into a different ancient gastronomic adventure. Strap in while we're traveling back in time and enjoy our delicious adventures. Another archaeogastronomical adventure begins this week, and today we're talking about the history of pickles. And we're not going to just say pickled vegetables, of course, but all sorts of pickles. The ancients literally pickled everything. And yes, today's episode will be a lot of fun, so strap in and enjoy. The unmistakable pungent smell of vinegar pierces through my nostrils, even as I talk now. I'm not entirely sure if I will ever get used to it. I mean, to the smell, of course. Especially when cooking with vinegar, as we do with pickles. I can hardly believe it will transform everyday vegetables to something delicious, something more important than the sum of its parts. And certainly, that something will actually make me change my mind about vinegar. I mean, I like vinegar, don't get me wrong, I do like it. I use it in salads and marinades all the time, of course. But yeah, unlike my father, of course, who never liked vinegar in foods. Such a strange man sometimes. Well, all the times, actually. Anyway, I digress. Pickles are, of course, popular and important. Perhaps a lot more important in the past, as this can be attested in the use of the word on everyday conversation and expressions through the ages. For many thousands of years, pickles were extremely important due to the fact that food could be made to last. From the summers of abundance, food could actually be preserved and let humans get by in the lean seasons. The glut of vegetables, fish and meat could be preserved and provide significant calorific content for the ancient families the world over. At the same time, preserving food meant that ancient people could transport it over vast distances when traveling or when exchanging goods with other peoples and nations. No one knows really who invented and how the first pickles discovered, of course. But some of the most ancient civilizations have invented in parallel pickling techniques, in different ways, as we shall see. The Chinese pickled with salt, the Mesopotamians with vinegar. The techniques that they mastered over millennia are in use with us still today. In China, which is considered the birthplace of fermented salt pickles, a poem was written sometime in the 11th century BCE, describing pickling gourds. The Koreans took salt-fermented Chinese cabbage and added chilies to create their own fiery kimchi. The Japanese embraced the methods from both and added more of their own techniques, and today they boast at least 7 principal pickling techniques. In Iraq, a great variety of pickles known as tursi is prepared with vinegar. The vegetables are first soaked in brine, which crisps and firms them and allows limited fermentation, and then covered with cold vinegar that has been pre-boiled with herbs and spices. In the English vocabulary, the word pickle first appears around 1400 and is derived from the Dutch pekkel. At first, it referred to a spicy sauce served with meat, but soon came to mean brine or vinegar in which food was preserved. 17th century marked the high point of vinegar pickles in Britain. Experimentation and innovation, fired by developments at home and abroad, alongside the expansion of the kitchen garden, gave an abundance of produce to preserve, while trade with India brought exotic pickles to the table. Of course, we cannot talk about pickles without talking about vinegar, without talking about alcohol, because obviously the ancients found out that by fermenting grains and fermenting fruit juices, they could make alcohol, and then from alcohol, obviously, you can have vinegar, and from vinegar, you can preserve foods. The ancient Babylonians and Egyptians, the world's first beer brewers, took note of the grain's natural ability to unravel starch into sugar and harnessed it to create the process of malting. Maltsters germinate grain by exposing it to moisture, then stop its life cycle short by roasting and drying the grain. From there, they mix the malt with hot water, after which yeast can ferment the now unlocked sugars into alcohols, And voila, we have beer or mash for whiskey. Fermentation knows no borders. It's as much a part of a cooking tradition in Denmark as it's in Italy, Japan or China. Without fermentation, there is no kimchi, no sourdough bread, no parmigiano, no wine or beer, no pickles, no soy sauce. And fermentation is responsible for improving everything. Lacto-fermented pickles, where bacteria consume sugar and generate lactic acid, souring the vegetables in the process, and the brine in which they sit, simultaneously preserving them and rendering them more delicious. The word fermentation comes from the Latin word fervere, meaning to boil. The ancient Romans, upon seeing vats of grape juice spontaneously bubble and transform into wine, described the process using the closest analogue they could think of. And while those bubbling vats of grapes had nothing to do with boiling, they were true ferments in the modern scientific sense, as yeast-produced enzymes transform the sugars in the grapes into alcohol. From a taste perspective, the processes at work in fermentation that matter to us are those that break down large chains of molecules into their constituent parts. Starches in foods like rice, barley, peas, and bread are actually long chains of linked molecules of glucose, a simple sugar. Proteins, which can be found in soybeans and meats, are in similar fashion lengthy, winding chains of amino acids. One of those amino acids, glutamic acid, registers on our taste receptors as umami, the elusive, crave-inducing quality that connects foods such as mushrooms, tomatoes, cheese, meat, and soy sauce. So the fact that starch molecules are too big to be registered by our body as sweet or umami-rich, when they break down to simple sugars and free amino acids through fermentation, then become obviously delicious. Our affection for the tastes those microbes produce have allowed them to evolve and stay in our company. We have been fermenting for so long that we might consider these microorganisms domesticated, just like our household cats and dogs. Sure, tricky to understand when they're hungry, and they need a bit more work to keep happy, but this is the job of the fermenter. In fact, some people, certain philosophers, might say that humans were domesticated by these bacteria, enzymes, and fungi in order for them to thrive. There's definitely an element of codependence and cooperation here. These organisms occupy environments the world over, just like humans. They are present in the milk of mammals, meaning you and I have been involved in an intractable relationship with these bacteria since the first moments of our lives. Lactobacilli are present on the skins and leaves of just about any vegetable or fruit you would ever want to ferment. The first mention of koji in print can be found in the Rites of Zhu, a Chinese governmental text from around 300 BCE, which referred to the mold as chu, spelled Q-U. Over the next few centuries, records indicate that chu became a major commodity in China. Instructions for the brewing of grain-based wines and bean pastes appear in official Chinese texts some 300 years later, and a steady proliferation of knowledge followed. By the 8th century CE, koji had reached Japan. In Greek language, modern Greek that is, we use the word tursi, which comes from the Turkish word tursu. And certainly I think the Turks have taken the lead and dethroned the Greeks and the Romans, and they're renowned for the love of pickles, a lot more than many others. I believe the Turkish people are known all over Europe for the love of pickles. You don't have to go far. In every Middle Eastern and Turkish supermarket in UK, you can find a dizzying and dazzling array of pickles on offer, and all from Turkey. Now, connecting to the previous episode about the history of olive oil, the humble olive is certainly the most famous of all pickles. Early Mediterranean civilizations discovered that olives which produce the magical liquid gold can also be used as food. They can be debittered by soaking them in repeated changes of water, a rather long process, sometimes taking many months and requiring the use also of a brine solution, which actually even improved their taste by slightly fermenting them. Here is fermentation again, always playing its magical transformative role. I love it. Olives were found in the shipwreck dated back to 600 BCE of a possible Etruscan origin. It seems all over the Mediterranean people were eating olives. The Etruscan civilization thrived in central North Italy, and they were the closest neighbors and rivals of Romans, and Rome absorbed them into their sphere of influence around 300, 200 BCE. Of course, archaeologists also excavated Pompeii and found olives there too, in the lava-buried stores of the ancient city. From Turkey to Spain, these little bitter bombs are cultivated and cured in a huge variety of ways and with a huge variety of ingredients. All olives are green at first, turning black as they ripen. In ancient Greece, special olive varieties were harvested green with the express purpose of pickling. Romans, of course, being, as usual, a lot more impatient and of a practical nature compared to the philosophical Greeks, came up with a technique that improved the fermenting and also reduced the time needed considerably. Supplementing the brine with lye from wood ashes, which is sodium hydroxide, cut the time required to produce edible olives from months to mere hours. Dry or Greek-style curing is a method in which plump black olives are layered in barrels with dry rock salt. No liquid is added. The salt breaks down the bitterness and leaches it out. The olives are stirred daily, and a purplish liquid leached from them is drained from the bottom of the barrels. After 4 to 6 weeks, the olives are rinsed to remove the salt and glycoside and lightly coated in oil. They are wrinkled and purple in color, and while these qualities might seem a bit odd at first, the flavor is excellent and the nutritional value is excellent too. Cato, the ancient Roman writer, in his Liber De Agricultura, notes that the varieties Orchite and Posea are excellent when preserved green in brine. He offers the recipe below for pickling in vinegar and oil, which is typical of many. How green olives are conserved. Before they turn black, are to be broken and put into water. The water is to be changed frequently. When they have soaked sufficiently, they are drained, put into vinegar and oil is added. Half a pound of salt to 1 peck of olives. Fennel and lentisk put up separately in vinegar. When you decide to mix them, use quickly. Pack in preserving jars. When you wish to use, take with dry hands. If you love pickles and crave the fermented little treasures, Malbin Greek has a plethora of preserved foods from all over the Hellenic countryside. Let's start with the Seikilos pork from Mane, which is like no other pork you ever had. Preserved in extra virgin olive oil and smoked over sage wood, it's just amazing. You can eat it in omelettes or with fava puree and topped with caramelized onions. I've got a recipe on my Patreon for that. Or you can eat it simply on toast. Even you can have it on its own, like a meze with ouzo or chipuro. Then trikalinos anchovies in olive oil. They are amazing too. Or of course the legendary barrel-aged feta from Costarelos, an amazing cheese, matured for 6 months in oak barrels in brine. Or the naturally fermented plum olives, an ancient variety from Mycenae. Or the classic pickled Santorini caper leaves. Another little gastronomic secret of the Greek island life. Simply use them in salads or with tomato on tacos barley rusks. So much variety of wonderful produce to choose from. Or try Malbin Greek's homemade tarama, salted and cured codro with a unique beautiful taste like no other. Malbin and Greek, the one-stop shop for your Greek fix. Shop now online and get a 15% discount with the code DELICIOUS and get the exquisite goods delivered to your door. The 2nd century physician Galen, that we have heard of in previous episodes, thought olives to be beneficial to health. In his treatise De Alimentorum Facultatibus on the properties of foodstuffs, he observed that those stored in salt brine and eaten with fish sauce before a meal purge the intestine, strengthen the stomachos, and stimulate the appetite. Olives pickled in vinegar were even better. A handbook of Greek humoral dietary theory, De Alimentis, concurred. The green ones that are conserved as colimbades are good to eat owing to their astringency. They arouse the appetite. Those covered in vinegar are especially suited as food. The procedure of pickling olives, described above by Cato, other procedures from Columella and other writers, more than 2,000 years ago, is still practiced today, and which, to my mind, is incredible. Overall, ancient Romans loved their pickles, and Pliny listed many different varieties of pickles and their provinces, providing a remarkable catalogue of flavors. Onions, for example, were pickled in honey and vinegar, a recipe of a kind still found in cookery books. One of its virtues was to stimulate thirst, so that Romans ate it throughout the meal. Later, the Franks adopted the same custom and are said to have eaten onions as avidly as they've drained the tankards of beer. Gherkins, first mentioned as late as 1549, the first written mention of gherkins actually, when it occurs in the work of Robert Estienne. Although cucumbers and gherkins, as obviously we know, they're a small variety of rough-skinned cucumber, have been very popular in Europe in classical times. Gherkins picked before they ripen have been eaten in India for more than 30 centuries, with salt or lemon juice. We in Europe use vinegar instead. Few of us realize how exotic the gherkin once was. Gherkins came to Europe during the Renaissance. The English gherkin, like the related German Gurke, for cucumber and gherkins alike, comes ultimately from the Greek word agurion. The ancient Mesopotamians had a taste for pickles. You remember, Mesopotamia is considered the cradle of civilization, and we have written records of recipes and stuff from about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. The ancient Mesopotamian people had a taste for pickles. Among the world's earliest recorded recipes, inscribed on clay tablets, are several which call for siku, a sauce prepared from pickled fish or locusts. The Mesopotamians used this piquant brine to flavor the dishes. They made vinegar from barley or grapes, and they served a variety of pickles with their meals. In the ancient city of Mari, the grand royal palace of Zimri Lim retained a pantry maid, whose special duties included making pickles and fruit conserves for the king's pleasure. It is likely she pickled the vegetables as cooks in the region do now, salting or soaking them in brine before immersing them in vinegar. Were we able to step back in time, we would find the maid in the royal pantry preparing turnips, snake melons, leeks, onions, radishes, palm hearts, capers, and olives. At certain times of the year, reed cages rustling with migratory locusts or grasshoppers would be delivered to the palace to meet their demise. They were packed live into earthenware jars and drowned in brine. Freshly picked locusts were a tasty and popular snack. The above practice was taken up by the Persians, the next superpower in the region, an empire in the Near and Central Middle East, which came to their height at around 500 BCE. Through its various guises, from the Seleucid Empire, the Parthian Empire, the Sassanids, and so on, it continued until the Arab conquest, when they picked the techniques for pickling, and much later the Ottomans too, and thanks to them, a long-lasting tradition of pickling with a familiar acidic kick was established in the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain. In modern Iran and Iraq, the Persians and Arabs ruled supreme and established some of the richest and most influential learning centers of the medieval world. The city of Baghdad was the epicenter, the culinary capital of epic proportions, a shining light in the so-called Dark Ages, which we know they weren't Dark Ages, of course. The sophistication of the Persians' court's eating habits and cuisine, augmented with the Arab thriftiness, gave rise to something more complex and richer than its constituent parts, a culinary tradition in which the sour flavors of fermented foods in vinegar, lemon or grape juice were highly prized. Tastes that were amply sated by pickles. The Abbasid Caliphate in the 8th century ate pickles and relishes along with sour and salty condiments or dips, known as kamak, that were an essential part of daily meals. They were eaten with bread as appetizers, or taken through the meal to pep up the appetite and aid digestion. The Abbasid prince Ibn al-Mutaz was moved enough to write a poem extolling their splendor. Of course, we are lucky enough to know how these relishes and pickles were prepared. The recipes have come down through two remarkable cookbooks. Ibn Sayyar al-Waraq's Book of Recipes records the dishes of kings and caliphs, lords and leaders from the 8th century to the 10th century. A later work of the same title, penned by the 13th century scribe known as al-Baghdadi, unashamedly records for posterity his personal favorites. Here we discover a pickled shrimp relish prepared with apples and honey wine that doubles as an aphrodisiac, and a chutney called makra, prepared from chopped turnip, quince, Levantine apple and citron, soured with a starter of bread dough to encourage fermentation, a technique still used today in northern Iraq to pickle turnips. We also learn how to pickle capers, olives and locusts. Pickled locusts were a favorite of the ancient Mesopotamians, as we've seen earlier. That recipe for them, which appears thousands of years later in the medieval manuscripts from Baghdad, should be surprising, I guess, but it's not. There's a remarkable similarity between the recipes inscribed on 3 cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia written around 1700 BCE and those on Al-Waraq's cookbook, almost 3,000 years later. If, as it seems, the food customs of the Mesopotamians, including the combination of ingredients and spices and the liking of vinegar, were acquired by the Persians, then the Persians in turn contributed with their tastes and innovations, which in turn embraced and elaborated upon by the Arabs. But this culinary time and space travel past the parcel game did not stop there. The lineage of many pickles enjoyed across North Africa and the Middle East and Spain, as well as Latin America, can be traced back to these early recipes. A history of pickles is the history of the world. Pickles is a relish, a condiment, a preservation technique to store food pre-fridge for millennia. A gift from the gods, surely. One can pickle fish, pickle meat, such as birds and pork especially, pickle cheese, which the most famous pickle cheese, of course, is feta, surely. Going back to our lovely scribe and foodie al-Baghdadi, who devotes a whole chapter to pickles, relishes and condiments, he says vinegar pickles were made in great variety, using a profusion of fresh produce supplied from Baghdad's fertile hinterland. He prepared sweet pickled turnips from chopped pieces of the root, salted, spiced and herbed, and immersed in vinegar, sweetened with honey and colored with saffron. For mint pickle, he takes dried leaves and sprinkles them with aromatic herbs, bottling them with celery leaves and quarters of peeled garlic in good vinegar, golden with saffron. He also offers the following recipe for aubergine pickle, which we can still find prepared this way across the Middle East today, 800 years later. Take medium aubergines and cut off half the stems and leaves, then half boil them in water and salt. Take them up and dry them off. Then quarter them lengthwise and stuff them with fresh celery leaves, a few bunches of mint and peeled cloves of garlic, and pack them one on another in a glass jug. Sprinkle a little of the herbs and finely ground mixed spices on them. Cover them with good vinegar and leave them until they're thoroughly mature and use them. Fish, meat and poultry were regularly pickled in vinegar for keeping. A particular dish, sekbaj, best described as meat set in vinegar aspic, is of great significance to our pickle story. Sekbaj was a favorite dish of both the Sasanian Persian court and the Arabs. Its name is derived from sik, the Persian for vinegar, and baj, meaning stew. It was prepared by cooking pieces of fatty meat in water with herbs, spices, and assorted vegetables, to which wine vinegar and honey or date molasses was added, each to balance the other. The stew was finished with almonds, saffron, and dried fruits, and once it had cooled, it was sprinkled with rose water. This dish was to inspire pickled foods of a different form in Spain, Portugal and Latin America. The dishes and relishes of the medieval cookbooks of Baghdad continue to resonate in the variety of pickles. Torsi, derived from the tors, meaning sour in Persian, and from which the Turks get the tursu and the Greek tursi, which are enjoyed across North Africa and the Middle East. The Arabs swept into the Iberian Peninsula from the early 8th century CE and ushered an era of unprecedented cultural, artistic, scientific and gastronomic growth that introduced to the backward locals to exotic ingredients and brand new exciting culinary customs. Dishes brought to Moorish Spain from the Eastern Islamic world, among them pickles and condiments and the esteemed sikbaj mentioned earlier. Today's berenjenas de Almagro from La Mancha is a direct legacy of the Arabs, and this is a dish of pickled aubergines prepared in Ciudad Real region of central Spain. This Almagro variety is unique to the area and are pickled when they're still small and green. Dishes prepared escabeche style, soused in vinegar, are common across Spain and Portugal, and they are another pickling legacy from the Arabs. Etymologically, the name is thought to be derived from the royal court dish we mentioned earlier, sikbaj. But don't quote me on that. That's what I've read. The common Arab practice of cooking and pickling fish, or any variety of fish, fowl and meat, spread to the Iberian Peninsula, proving very popular for preserving game, particularly partridge, quail, pigeon, rabbit, oily fish such as sardines, mackerel, shad and tuna, and in Portugal, small eels. In an early 14th century Catalan treatise, the Libre De Agricultura includes a recipe for escabeig or esquabe, all comprising fried fish, over which is poured a hot vinegar sauce thickened in various ways. Other medieval cookery manuscripts show this pickling technique traveled to France and Italy, and escabeche and scapece both refer to fried fish in a vinegar-based marinade, which is served cold, typically as an appetizer. Once in the pickling liquor and refrigerated, the fish will keep for a few weeks. The infamous conquistadores took the pickling technique of escabeche to Central and South America in the 16th century. The method was not only used for game and fish, as in Spain, but it was adopted and adapted to pickle vegetables using vinegar fermented from sugarcane. In South America, the meat of capybara, reputed to be the world's largest rodent, is prepared escabeche. A more conventional fish escabeche originates from the thriving colonial port of Veracruz in the second Spanish settlement in Latin America. And Latin American created its own fresh pickled fish dish, ceviche, which has been exported the world over. The dish, as you may know, is a specialty of Peru, from where it's believed to originate. Ceviche is prepared from raw fillets of fish, octopus, squid or shrimps, or prawns, marinated in lemon, lime or bitter orange juice. The acidity of the citrus juices modifies the proteins of the fish, acting in a similar way to heat. Together with the acidic element, sliced onions, chilies and salt, they are combined and is served at room temperature. In Philippines, another Spanish colonial venture, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, a fresh fish pickle dish, known as kinilaw, using vinegar rather than citrus juice, has been prepared in the archipelago for at least 1,000 years. Whatever the origins of ceviche, definitely owes a lot to the Iberian trade routes between the ports of the New World and the Far East Asiatic islands. I would like to thank Richard Bignell and his studio Area 18 for the voiceover recording. And the studio is in North Acton area. If you ever need to record anything, guys, Richard Bignell is your man. Thank you once again for listening to the Delicious Legacy podcast. For the last few months, we've been working hard behind the scenes in order to create some food-related videos for your hungry and ravenous eyes. I'm pleased to say some progress has been made on that front. Keep your eyes and ears open. I love to hear your thoughts and responses, so please head over on Twitter and tell me what you think. You can follow the podcast at The Delicious Legacy, all one word. Or join me on Patreon, where you can put The Delicious Legacy again, one word, and that's Patreon, Patreon/The Delicious Legacy, or Google Patreon and The Delicious Legacy podcast. This podcast can only keep going with the generous support of our subscribers on Patreon. You guys keep me running, you help me cover my costs, and allow me to dedicate more time researching each episode. I want to thank all of my subscribers for helping so far to create this series. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider going to Patreon and type The Delicious Legacy Podcast and contribute something and keep this podcast running. Thanks for listening. All the best. Over and out.